We might think of celebrities as having perfect lives, but what goes on behind closed doors? Hi everyone, Ken here. Today we are exploring the home of renowned Gilded Age architect Stanford White, a beautiful setting for unspeakable crime. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode of This House. In 1853, Stanford White was born into a poor but well-respected family in New York City. His father Richard was a Shakespearean scholar, and even though he made very little money, he often found himself in the company of high society, entertaining them with his vast knowledge of the English playwright. The young Stanford would accompany his father to dinners, banquets, and balls, where he was able to forge connections with the emerging generation of New York's wealthy elite. Oftentimes, he would find himself in the company of notable contemporary artists such as Louis Comfort Tiffany and John Lafarge. The impressionable Stanford was inspired to no end by the creative genius of these artists and began sketching from a young age, quickly developing a taste for highly stylized architecture. By the age of 18, his hobby had turned into a passion. Without any formal education nor training in architecture, he was referred to the office of the most prominent architect of the time, Henry Hobson Richardson, where he apprenticed directly under the architect as his principal assistant. The more he learned from Richardson, the more questions he had. When he was 25 years old, he left for Europe to study ancient architecture. After a year and a half of sightseeing, sketching, and studying, he returned to New York City, ready to take the world by storm. He joined forces with two other rising architects, Charles McKim and William Mead, to create the highly celebrated architecture firm of McKim, Mead & White. Together, this trio became an unstoppable force as they climbed their way to the top, designing palaces and mansions for the country's most influential and wealthy barons of industry. Suddenly, anyone who was anyone wanted their mansion, institution, church, or hotel to be designed by the trio. The demand for their work was so high that if they accepted you as a client, it became instant bragging rights. By the late 1880s, Stanford White had designed the backdrop for life in the upper echelons to take place. If you were attending a ball at one of the country's most expensive estates, there was a good chance the house had been designed by Stanford White. But as time went on, Stanford wanted his own palace, a home where he could cherish his own work. In the 1890s, while he was working on Henry Taylor's Manhattan mansion, it came up in conversation that Mr. Taylor had a brownstone coming up for rent right next door to Stanford's apartment. It had been converted into a boarding house, but held a prime location on a corner lot facing Gramercy Park. One thing led to another, and Stanford was able to negotiate a fair lease, with the condition that he would be allowed to make any changes to the building as he saw fit. Taylor, being a huge fan of his work and a current client, gleefully agreed. In 1898, Stanford began reworking the interior, borrowing huge sums of money to renovate and decorate. While he made very few changes to the exterior, he did move the entrance of the house below street level, so the guests would arrive in the basement level entrance hall. You would then be directed to the reception room to wait for the Whites to welcome you to their home. After being greeted, you would make your way upstairs to arrive in the first floor stair hall, where Stanford had incorporated antique Spanish columns and centuries-old Italian and Flemish tapestries to decorate the walls. Facing the stairs, a floor-to-ceiling stone fireplace rises 12 feet, with stone cherubs framing intricate relief work on the upper mantel. To the right of the fireplace, towards the front of the house, the drawing room would be the first to dazzle you with its velvet walls rising below a gilded frieze. On the opposite wall, we will find the fireplace pronounced by Solomonic columns supporting a broken pediment. Stepping back, we can see the fireplace from the stair hall beyond the opening as we make our way towards the other end of the house. To get to the dining room, we will cut back across the stair hall, passing over antique Persian rugs. Just as Stanford had retrofitted old European rooms for his clients, he imported and reassembled a 16th century ceiling from a chapel in Florence. He went on to incorporate and repurpose several other 16th century Italian pieces, such as the fireplace, tapestries, and statues. In the corner of the room, he created an alcove using rounded windows in which he placed a 16th century Italian Renaissance fountain. In 1904, his wife, Bessie, hosted a midnight musicale, where dinner guests dined at midnight while listening to live music from a Hungarian orchestra pouring in between the 16th century wood columns separating the adjoining music room. The music room was clad in painted wall panels with gold leaf accents. While trained professionals were allowed to play the instruments, no one else was allowed to touch them, as the collection was mostly made up of rare and antique instruments from all around the world. Towards the rear of the house, Stanford had adjoined and renovated the carriage house to include a skylit vestibule to double as a conservatory. He decorated the space with Delft tiles and repurposed marble balustrade. Heading up the stairs, we will find a studio and gallery located above the old carriage house. We enter the gallery through a grilled opening encased in a Renaissance-era door surround. To allow more light to illuminate Stanford's collection of royal portraits, the ceiling was raised with antique Flemish oak trusses to reinforce skylights. To the far end of the room, a Henry VII fireplace continued into the gable with knotted relief work. Now that Stanford White had the house of his dreams, it was time for him to enjoy it, or so he thought. As we continue his story, we will see more pictures of his house. Even though Stanford White had built a successful career, he was living far beyond his means. He was unable to afford to live such a lavish lifestyle and had borrowed money to make his dreams come true. All the while, he had not made a rent payment to Mr. Taylor in years, nor had he told his wife Bessie about any of his debt, which came as a surprise to her when he was murdered. On July 25, 1906, Stanford White was dining near the theater at the second Madison Square Gardens which he had designed. It was the opening night for the dinner show, Mademoiselle Champagne, and as the performer sang, "I Could Love a Million Girls," a man by the name of Harry Thaw approached Stanford White from behind and declared, "You've ruined my wife," and proceeded to fire 3 shots into Stanford, killing him instantly. When this happened, there was a lot of confusion, as Stanford White had been well respected and accepted by high society. Why would anyone want to kill him? In the court proceedings that followed, as Harry Thaw was put on trial, it came out that Stanford had been grooming Harry's fiancée, Evelyn Nesbit, from a young age. The details of Stanford's secretive and abusive past came into the spotlight as more underage accusers came forward. On YouTube, I can't go into the specifics, but instead, I will quote Mark Twain's reaction to the testimony. On the witness stand, in the hearing of a courtroom crowded with men, the girl told in the minutest detail the history of White's pursuit of her, even down to the particulars of his atrocious victory, a victory whose particulars might well be said to be unprintable. Knowing the cynical and oftentimes blatant approach Mark Twain penned on social issues, for him to use the term unprintable when describing the crimes of Stanford White against children, it speaks to the depths of disgust he elicited. Harry Thaw was charged with first-degree murder and held in jail without bond, where, because of his social status, he received 3-course catered meals and was allowed to wear his own tailored clothes. Eventually, the judge declared him insane and sentenced him to a very comfortable stay in prison. During this time, Harry became a feminist icon, being called a protector of women by several publications. In 1915, he was declared mentally competent by a judge and was released back into the public. Meanwhile, Stanford's widow Bessie was left to deal with the mess her husband had left for her. Stanford had left over $250,000 in debt for her to pay, the modern equivalent of over $8 million of debt. She held an estate auction where antiques and architectural elements were stripped from the home, which funded the repayment of only 1/10 of Stanford's debt. The house was then sold by Mr. Taylor to the Princeton Club, who stripped every room except for the gallery, which they left essentially untouched. It then went on to be used by the YWCA as the Young Women's Christian Association's International Institute, where several historically significant speeches and lectures were given. While it was looking like the house would last as a landmark in the city, Alexander Bing, a prominent developer, had been quietly buying up the block. In 1924, he purchased the building, evicted the YWCA, and had Stanford White's mansion torn down to make way for the Gramercy Park Hotel. What did you think about this video? Did you have a favorite room? Were you surprised to learn about the dark past of one of America's most celebrated architects? Let me know down below in the comments section. And while you're there, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode of This House. I would also like to take a moment to say a very special thank you to our This House supporters whose names you can see on screen right now. For just $5 per month, you too can see your name on the screen and show your support for the production of these videos. I'll see you next time on This House.